This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. It's episode 414 of the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast, and for this week's episode, I'm in Greensboro Bend, Vermont, and sitting across from me for this conversation is Shaun Hill. Welcome to the podcast, Shaun.
Thank you for having me.
The occasion next week is the 15th anniversary of Hill Farmstead, and as I was coming up to this area, Vermont and Montreal, thought it might be good to finally sit down and have a conversation. Of course, you're in a little different place with yourself and the business and brewing in general than would have been a decade ago. And so, but it's an interesting perspective, this arc of Hill Farmstead coming from one of the hottest brewery launches in 2010 and kind of leading this proto-development of a certain kind of craft beer through the heady days of the 20-teens, has then led through quite a bit of development and quite a bit of introspection, reflection. You're in a different place now. The brewery is still here, making beautiful beers, celebrating 15 years. But of course, the entire world of craft beer has also shifted around that because we live in a post-structuralist world and there are no firm things for us to build around. Everything is dynamic, constantly in motion. And the world of craft beer is as well. So we're going to talk about how that those shifts have happened for you, where that brings you now. We're going to talk about that kind of history and that history of creativity, but also what that means for beer making here at Hill Farmstead today. Before we do that, for years, G&D Chillers has chilled the beers you love, partnering with 3,000 plus breweries across the country. They're proud of the cool partnerships they've built, offering 24/7 service and support. They build with non-proprietary parts, expert craftsmanship, and constant innovation. Their in-house engineering crew have been piping breweries, wineries, and distilleries for more than 30 years. They offer free piping design and consultation with the sale of every chiller they build. Reach out for a quote today at gdchillers.com or call to discuss your next project. And brewers, what if your yeast could do more than just ferment? With Berkeley Yeast, it can. They bioengineer ordinary strains and make them extraordinary, enhancing the flavors you want and eliminating the ones you don't. Now, in addition to competitive pricing, they're offering free overnight shipping on 5+ barrel pitches. Try it out. If you don't love it, they'll happily refund you. So why settle for ordinary when you can brew with better yeast? Visit berkeleyyeast.com to learn more and start brewing with science on your side. Also, a day in the life of a brewer is packed enough as it is, so why not let Old Orchard assist with R&D? Custom blend development is available through their innovative R&D lab. Their bulk division supplies a wide range of beverage segments, making it a one-stop shop for flavoring beer and beyond. More information and free samples are waiting at oldorchard.com/brewer. That's oldorchard.com/brewer. All right, Shaun.
Okay.
We normally start the podcast off with a little bit of history. A lot of people know yours, but why don't you walk us through your arc of brewing from catching the bug to deciding to get into this professionally, to then launching a business, and then maybe we'll trace that arc of the business, over the last 15 years.
Sure. So, I became interested in fermentation at quite a young age. I thought it was magical. I still do think fermentation is magical. And there are certain aspects of it that I actually don't want to understand chemically, biologically, simply because I like to preserve the magical element of it all. I don't know, like from home brewing and having a homebrew club, to entering beers in the Vermont homebrew competition, winning some medals. Eventually by 2002, 2003, I was an assistant brewer at the Shed Brewery in Stowe, which consisted of washing tanks, graining out for the brewers. I mean, I think the brewers at the time, Tim and Howie, who went on to start Green Mountain Distillers, must have been really, really psyched that this early 20s kid was doing a lot of their work for them. That was not actually part of the assistant brewer's job. I was supposed to just be washing kegs and filling growlers. So they got to do a lot less work. which I'm sure they loved. And then in 2004, so during that time, I was also painting houses during the summer and working part-time at the Shed Brewery, also teaching at a private school part-time. And then in 2004, with the money I'd saved up from painting houses, I did an around-the-world trip. And I went to California for the first time, actually second time, New Zealand, Australia, Thailand, Nepal, and then eventually Europe for the first time. And it was in 2004 that I went to Dodola and Cantillon in particular, two places that stand out. And, coincidentally, the owners and brewers of those breweries have become friends many years later. So then in 2005, I took the head brewer job at the Shed Brewery, and it was just me on a 7-barrel Peter Austin system at that time with Ringwood yeast, brewing 5 days a week, all by myself. And I've got to say, I don't think I could do that over again. Thinking about the ability of a 25-year-old to arrive, mill, mash in, keg off a serving tank, then move a conditioning tank into a serving tank, sometimes through filter, all while brewing's going in the background, and then transfer a primary fermenter into the conditioning tank and clean the open fermenter primary tank just in time to knock out into it, and doing that 5 days a week by yourself. Completely nuts. There's no space, but I learned how to refine myself and become sort of superhuman, supercharged in that sense, and get pacing. Eventually they let me hire an assistant brewer, which was great. And I hired someone from the kitchen named Jim Conroy, who actually went on to become the first brewer at the Shed Cannery when John and Jen opened the cannery in 2011. They hired Jim, who had still been at the Shed at that point.
You mean the Alchemist?
Oh, sorry. What did I say?
You said the Shed
Cannery.
The
Shed, yeah. Sorry.
The Alchemist
Sorry, the
Cannery.
Alchemist Cannery. And yeah, so then it was 2 years at the Shed, and then went to Trout River Brewing in Lindenville for 1 year. And that was meant as a sort of placeholder for a little while I was trying to start grassroots brewing in Hardwick. I was trying to do that in the Vermont soy space, and the goal was to kind of do the like Daronka-esque thing, like a kind of hobby brewery where I was brewing just on the weekends. But it ended up, for various reasons that I won't go into, it ended up not working out, but I'd accumulated all this equipment I also had a home equity loan to start buying some equipment. And then at the point that I realized that wasn't going to work out, my best friend and I went back to Belgium again at the end of 2007, and I realized this is my shot. I need to go live in Europe before I start a brewery back in the United States, back in Vermont. And yeah, just through random happenstance, a friend of a friend told me about a job at Norbert Brokus that Anders Kissmeyer was looking for an American brewer, ideally, because they're brewing very American-inspired beers, to take over their pub. And it turned out that my great friend Will Myers had just come back from brewing a heather ale and a version of Charisse Cassé with Anders. And Will...
Rest in peace, Cambridge Brewing.
Yes.
Will's genius.
And Will, thank goodness, thank you, Will, gave me a glaring recommendation. Apparently, I later found out to Anders. I think he said something like, Anders, you're not going to be able to find a better brewer to take total ownership for this pub and make killer beers. So in March, like around March 1st of 2008, I moved to Copenhagen at 29. No, I was 28 still at that point. And yeah, Copenhagen was a much different place in 2008 than it is now. I've been back many times. And it was, there was really no there was no onboarding. Like no one explained how Copenhagen worked to me. I got a ticket from a police officer on like my third day there because I was following the bicycle traffic and someone rode their bike across the crosswalk instead of waiting for a light. And apparently that's a huge no-no. So I immediately got a 500 kroner fine, and the police officer did not care that I didn't know the rules. There was no exception. So I spent, I stayed there until November of 2009. So I turned 30 in Copenhagen. And yeah, by the end of my time there, I just met all of the people that I needed to meet. I feel became great friends with Mikkel, Jeppe, the guys from the Coffee Collective, Kasper and Klaus, Peter Sana, who was my assistant brewer and one of my great friends, Christian Skoda Andersen, who started Olfabrikken. I mean, the list goes on. Just such an incredible community of people there. I was really exposed to a lot that I wouldn't have been exposed to here. And I'd been trying to raise some money, roughly $40,000 to $50,000 to start Hill Farmstead. And I met the people there who all loaned me like $5,000 to come back. I couldn't find anyone, no, or very few domestic people to loan me money other than
your business plan was $40,000 to $50,000 of initial investment.
Yeah, so I opened the brewery on like $50,000. Dave Broderick, who owned the Blind Tiger in New York City, was one of the angels who was really helpful also in my early business plan development. So I came back and set to work. And I should also mention that my other great and supportive friends throughout that period of time were Matteo and Andy Keeler of Jasper Hill Farm, my cheesemaker neighbors. And back in 04, 05, 06, I was also homebrewing beer on this 15-gallon system that I'd built in their barn. And that was the beer that I was taking to like BCTC in 2007, for example. That was a highlight, actually. Larry Bennett let me pour beer as Hill Farmstead Brewery in 2007 at BCTC. So I had like a mix ferment.
That's Belgium comes to Cooperstown at Omegang.
Yep. So I was pouring this beer called Terra Madre, which was a dandelion honey mix ferment beer, which eventually kind of became Vera May, which we'll be brewing this week. And like a kind of Belgian stout, some other things. So I was sort of exposed and, getting to meet my idols during that period of time, Tommy Arthur in particular at that BCTC. So came back, got to work, and ended up brewing the first batch of beer on March 30th, 2010. And that was a batch of Edward. The recipe has changed very little since then. I dropped initially it was like a 13 Plato beer, and then I dropped it to a 12.4 Plato beer and changed it from an IPA to a pale ale like 10 batches in or something. Just sort of realizing that there are a lot of IPAs and that I really wanted something that was lower alcohol, because in Vermont you have to drive to socialize.
Sure.
And I felt like Vermont needed an incredible American pale ale. Sierra Nevada, of course, is great inspiration.
That's an ESB.
True. Oh, I heard that. Yeah, I heard that.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and then in April of 2010, Anders came to visit, and we were brewing batch 4 in the brewery, which was called Fear and Trembling, which is a smoked Baltic porter that Anders had smoked all the malt for. And he was traveling from Chicago, where he was just at the World Beer Cup, and 3 of the beers I had brewed at Norbert Bräukhus won World Beer Cup medals, which we won gold medal Imperial Stout, gold medal barley wine, and silver medal American Style Sour Ale, which was vindication.
Sure,
wow,
sure.
Okay, maybe I can believe in myself. Maybe I can make good beer after all.
Of course, you'd already opened the brewery, so it was too late. You were now on that path.
But the first batch of beer hadn't even been released yet. Yeah, this was like the first week of April. The first batch, first beers went out like April 21st or something like that.
It's great timing for marketing on that too.
Yeah, it's it was interesting. The tasting that first batch of beer out of the fermenter. I think it was the first time that. It was the first time that this sort of like more chloride informed soft water profile with Conan yeast. At that time, I was getting yeast from John, the alchemist, and then oats, and then raw 2-row, et cetera, and then really kind of this hop profile that was inspired by Pliny the Elder, Simcoe, Chinook, Centennial, and a little bit of Cascade. I just remember like the hair on my arm standing up, like when I got to the end of fermentation and was about to dry out the beer, it was just so fruity and delicious. And I'd never tasted anything like it. And it still has this very significant flavor imprint in my mind that I'll never be able to shake.
And so your language for it is still American Pale Ale, even though it's pretty, fairly prototypical for what we would now consider New England. There isn't, although at the same time, the hop combination is definitely American, and so it ends up being this thing that triangulates between these, and texturally New England and hop character-wise, maybe a little bit more, West Coast or American. Yeah,
I mean, and the majority of my hoppy beers have discernible bitterness. I think beers should have bitterness.
Sure.
I think Edward was maybe... I don't know. You can ask other people that you interview. I think it was, at least for anyone that had it during that time, that it was an inspiration and maybe a bit of a predecessor to what became New England IPA, which would have used London 3, but would typically have very low bitterness, if any, just Whirlpool editions and huge dry hops, and they seem to finish a bit sweet. I might dare to say, by my taste, under attenuated, but it's my opinion.
I think there is a big, broad range of hazy IPA, and it's hard for me to even speak about it as a hegemonious type of thing because there are so many. I think like every beer style, it becomes so big that you now have regional, iterations, influences that take them in all sorts of different directions. And so I think that, that's the cool and interesting thing about it. I agree with you. I enjoy that bitterness. I think some of the best have much more bitterness than people give them credit for, especially those from Monkish or even Fidens for that matter. There's a fair amount of bitterness in there. I think, folks like to not focus on that. And then some people make them too big and too sweet, but that's a whole nother matter. But Edward became this kind of core beer. Obviously you're making it for Vermont, and it, it had some haze to it, not as this intentional, kind of, I'm going to make a hazy beer because no one was just trying to make hazy beer in 2010. In fact, you're probably trying not to make it too hazy. Some polyphenol haze is fine, but, thick and murky was just not a thing for anyone. That was a poor brewing process for a lot of folks, or the way that some other fellow brewers might have looked at it.
Yeah. I had batches that would have more clarity than others, but I think for the most part it was, I was using pre-milled raw 2-row at that point. And I wasn't paying attention to what the protein or the soluble ratio was. And it was just using the same coagulant level every time. But we don't have a filter. It's pretty raw. And it was just also single infusion mash. So I wasn't able to do any temperature rests. And some batches were very, very hazy. And for, I'm going to say 3 full years, I had to defend the way that our beer looked to people when people would come in, or when I was out in public. People would look at it and they'd be like, what is this? I've never seen a hoppy beer that looks like this. And I would hold my finger up to it and you could just just kind of see your finger through it. And then that's when I started calling it hazy. I was like, it's just a little haze, it's just unfiltered. And then I would get people to taste it and smell it, and they're like, wow, that's delicious. I've never had anything like it. And I'm like, cool, great. And seeing the pendulum swing on that over the last 15 years has just been crazy. I think some brewers now almost have a fear around brewing a beer that doesn't have haze. And that has been crazy, going from defending the haze to defending the clarity. So strange. But it just demonstrates how quickly perceptions and fixed ideas can change.
Ultimately that flavor and aroma and being able to recast it in a different context, looking at it differently, in some ways perfection's achievable. You have large breweries that have been able to create very repeatable and consistent processes for making perfect beer. Yeah. And so you can do that. It is possible, but at some point it becomes a little bit boring, doesn't it? And finding something that's imperfect, but with character and with edge that creates a different experience becomes more engaging in other ways. And I think that's one way to start looking at hazy IPA. It was this imperfect thing in that kind of classical sense that also opened up a different avenue of texture that we weren't necessarily considering, in terms of beer at that time, but which has become an incredibly important thing. Let's talk a little bit more about texture, but first, both classic and contemporary indie hops Lorien was developed with crisp, low-gravity beer in mind, a nod to the past with an eye to the future. Lorien seamlessly combines traditional elements of European noble hops with an elegant twang of American modernity. Low alpha and squeaky clean, Lorien provides a refined, smooth bitterness to any lager and delivers enticing flavors and aromas of lemon, lime zest, fresh melon, wild flowers, sweet hay, and cinnamon spice. Refreshing the past for a present time, Lorien's classic profile and distinct finish are conducive to celebration and appetite and evoke feelings of a grassy meadow near a cold mountain stream, just like we have many around here in Vermont.
All right.
Summer is near and Lorien awaits. Learn more about Lorien and the rest of Indie's varieties at www.indiehops.com. Indie Hops, life is short. Let's make it flavorful. And are you a craft brewery looking to elevate your branding? Steel chill cups are the perfect promotional tool. Crafted from 100% recyclable steel and proudly made in the USA, these 16-ounce cups come in vibrant red, blue, green, and gray. Designed to keep beverages cold and frosty to the touch, they enhance the drinking experience at festivals, tastings, and tap rooms. Customizable branding options allow breweries to showcase logos and unique designs, boosting brand recognition. These stylish cups not only serve a practical purpose, but also become keepsakes for beer lovers. Discover how steel chill cups can put your brand on every pour. Visit steelchillcups.com today. So we're talking about texture.
Texture,
Shaun.
yeah. It was when I was in Denmark, I remember just in the first week or two brewing one of the batches of beer. I think it was the Kings County Brown Ale, which as I recall was originally a collaboration that not with me, but it was before my time with Garrett Oliver, I think. And the recipe for a 1,000-liter batch, 10 hectoliter. Also, I learned how to brew in metric in Copenhagen, which was a godsend, and have never looked back. So Hill Farmstead is entirely metric. It makes everything so much easier. So happy for that experience. There was an addition of 500 grams of calcium chloride, which seemed like a lot. There was nothing else, just calcium chloride. And I remember emailing Greg Noonan, my great mentor, he and John Kimmick both, and was like, what is up with this? It seems like so much calcium. And Greg wrote back that he's like, oh well, it must be they're really trying to accentuate the mouthfeel. That saltiness can also really just enhance sort of body and sweetness and mouthfeel. And that was the light bulb moment. I've had many light bulb moments in my life, and that was one of them. And that was the point at which I also being in Europe, traveling around, I was starting to taste more wine than ever before, and I was like, okay, at this time, beer was kind of dominated still by the Stone mentality. If this is bitter,
Sure,
it's aggressive. If you don't like it, you're not worthy. That kind of mentality, and for the most part, beer was not. These are all my opinions. These are not generalizations. So for anyone that disagrees, I completely honor whatever you feel. As I recall, in my memory, beer was a little aggressive and unrefined. With the exception of a milk stout or something. And at that time, I was also some of the recipes had oats in them, and it was the only organic ingredient that we had in our storage shed was flaked organic raw oats. So as I started building our recipes, I was using oats and chloride, and starting to focus on texture. And when I wrote that Hill Farmstead, what's still on the label to this day, I think I wrote it in November, December of 2009. The goal was to craft elegant, succinct beers of distinction. And I mean, many things have changed, but that text is still on every single label. The Hill Farmstead is the culmination of travel and insight, friendships and explorations, and a sense of a sense of one's place. And I still feel that way very much. So I think, to an extent, if there is some sort of 15-year legacy contribution or something to whatever the vault of craft beer evolution or something, I think for me, I believe that it was this taking these hoppy beers and so on and so forth, or all the beers really, and really, for me, just focusing on mouthfeel. That's the most important thing for me. Is I didn't feel like many beers really felt that great in perceptually in one's mouth, and trying to really craft this experience, both with using lactic acid for adjusting pHs, getting rid of alkalinity, making sure the water is soft, adding texture with chloride, with oats, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's been my philosophy. And yeah, I think then the majority of the beers here follow that for the most part.
How did fermentation, figure into that? Because, obviously yeast contribution is a big piece of this New England or hazy IPA, and, London Ale 3 is a big driver of that. And in general, obviously there are other yeasts now too that, can, and of course we've got lots of science out there now from various yeast folks like Omega that can show the genes that create haze positivity, and we know a lot more about some of those mechanisms now. But that London Ale 3 was a primary vehicle then at the time that that helped even other brewers beyond Hill Farmstead continue to push and see where that whole piece of texture could go.
Yeah, two things come to mind there. One of them is that I thought the beers that Pat was brewing at Alpine, 2010 and earlier and later, also had really, although he was using Chico, had incredible. They were so round, so beautiful. I don't know what he was doing, but we had an affinity for one another. Some mutual admiration was the name of the collaboration we brewed together. In those early days, for the first, I think roughly 4 months, I was using Conan in the brewery, and then White Labs had it banked, and I brought in 2 pitches in a row that stopped fermenting, where Edward stopped fermenting at 10 Plato. Yes, I oxygenated and et cetera. I did all the things, and it just stopped fermenting. And Kimmick was having the same issues at the pub, at around the same time. We were talking to Neva, and they they don't know. They messed something up. So in the middle of the summer of 2010, I had to dump 2 batches of beer and didn't have beer like in the middle of July or something because of this. And so I immediately called Yeast and ended up talking to Jess, and what was explained to him what was going on, explained the flavor contribution that Conan was giving to the beers. And Conan also is very like, you can produce quite a clear beer or like a gentle haze, or it can be more hazy at times, maybe with higher dry hopping rates. So he was like, well, I've been homebrewing some batches and have had a couple beers with London 3. I think it could work. Well, would you want us to send you some? And I was like, yeah, let's try it out. So I used it for 20 generations, and then banked it at that point, and that's what we call Damon here at the brewery, named after my dog, or my former dog. God bless his soul. And London 3, at the point that we started using London 3, which was in like August of 2010, the beers became much more consistently haze stable, which was not intentional. So there you are with chloride, flaked oats, London 3 for the first time. And then so I just kept using Damon for quite a long time. And yeah, there's definitely, depending on oxygenation and pitch rates, so on and so forth, which I won't go into. There's, those yeast strains can also contribute pretty profound softening, depending on how one approaches those things. Or if you don't approach them in the same way that I do, the beers can still be edgy, and the yeast might not contribute as much roundness or ester formation.
Sure. How did hops, play into this? Obviously, we also know that certain hops have more of that haze and texture contribution than others do. Was that part of your early, calculus with some of these? Was there some difference in that kind of texture based on hops that you chose for those beers?
Really, like low cohumulone. Actually at the time that I was leaving the shed when I was at Trout River, this was like the first hop crisis when things went into the $20 zone. And I was trying to start, I knew that I was going to start the brewery. So I already started contracting for hops. So I'm in Denmark and I have to buy this contract from Country Malt on my credit card. And then when I came back for Christmas vacation, both in 2008 and then in 2009, I remember like meeting Will Shelton and like just meeting other like Paul Saylor, like meeting people and just being like, will you buy these, please? Will you buy these, please? And trying to sell these hops, peddling them.
That's probably a good time to have some extra hops, though. I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess that was also the first time I took some Palisade and Glacier back to Copenhagen and put all 10 kilos in the whirlpool of the 10 hectoliter batch and made a beer that was all whirlpool edition, which Will Myers told me was a stupid way of making beer, but very delicious. And that also has pretty much become the norm these days. I was using Warrior, or by the time Hill Farmstead opened, all my bittering additions were CO2 extract, like Warrior CO2 extract. And then late additions. Why Warrior CO2?
And why CO2? Yeah.
I was using Perla extract in Denmark. Anders was a fan of using that for bittering on some of the beers, just for consistency, which, from an aging standpoint, I mean, not knowing exactly, if you want to be precise, using CO2 extract is very stable and consistent. Yeah.
And then in terms of other kinds of textural contributions, you were also into New Zealand hops, from those very early days. We all know that they have, certain New Zealand hops have a more propensity towards casting off haze and, and adding to some of that kind of textural contribution.
Yeah. And let me see, I think I first tried Nelson Sauvin in 04 or 05 when Sly Fox used to do their IPA series. I forgot what it's called, but they did like this single hop series, and then they would pour all of them at once at the end of the year. So, the things from like January, February were pretty old, but it was a good opportunity to be able to taste all of these new varieties. And yeah, in 2010, I was brewing Nelson Single Hop IPA. At our grand opening, we had Citra Single Hop IPA. And then I got hooked up with somehow with John Gorman from Haas at the time, who sent me this like book that he had worked on, or this like manual. And I came across Galaxy, so brought in Galaxy for the first time and brewed a double IPA with Galaxy. I was playing around with these like double IPAs with these like double Nelson. And then also 2000, I think this is 2010. I think I managed to get like 22 pounds of Riwaka as well. And then wasn't able to get it maybe in 11, and then got a bunch more. I mean, I was trying to like contract. No one would contract with me for a walk. I was like, this is incredible. And then in 2012, managed to get, I think maybe we got like 80 kilos or something. So I was like, great. So I actually created a beer, which is called Susan, that was based on using Riwaka in this IPA, and then I couldn't get it anymore. And actually through a really roundabout story that I won't go into, that's how I ended up meeting Joss from Garage Project, and then eventually Dave Dunbar, was because I was like, okay, I'm just gonna find someone and we're gonna grow this hop ourselves in New Zealand. Then fine, like no one wants to sell this, and Joss was on board with this. So I actually flew on a whim down to New Zealand to have a meeting with this Maori business group, Kono, to talk about growing these hops. And then on the same trip, that ended up not panning out. On the same trip, Dave and the Freestyle folks had just bought the Sunrise Valley farm, like, I don't know, a few weeks before. And we like drove to go look at it, and he was there, and we just started talking and shook hands, and he knew who I was. I was so surprised. But and that forged an alliance and a partnership that still exists. What, 8 or 9 years later?
Yeah. What was it about Riwaka that captured you so much?
I mean, and the hop has, as all of these things do, I mean, Citra is not the same as it was in 2010 either, for various reasons. I don't know. It really had this like interesting sort of cantaloupe, just this like gentle fruitiness to it. Like, it was nothing like I'd never experienced anything like it. It just really, I thought it was really captivating, I mean, in a good way. There are a lot of hops that are unlike anything I've ever had, and I never want to use them again.
Sure.
Which is why I also have been pretty selective about single hop beers. I got burned on a bunch of different things. I remember making like a Summit single hop beer in 2010 that just ended up tasting like onion soup or something, yeah. But it turns out back then, still 2016, the New Zealand growers, they didn't know if this craft beer thing in the US was real. I remember driving around talking to New Zealand hops, talking to growers. They weren't sure, but the New Zealand hops was not given the memo to the growers. I was trying to like go direct. I don't know. It was so difficult to contract for hops, and Dave kind of blew that open. And now there's like multiple 1,000-hectare farms doing on farm pelletizing. It's really like that industry really blew up down there.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I obviously was just there for Hop Harvest and recorded a bunch of episodes, and it is interesting to hear someone like, Brent McGlashan talk about how, through those 2000s, before this craft beer boom, those farms were not really going to be viable. Like they hit points where the co-op there, NZ, was not producing enough to break even. And, and then in fact that it was American craft brewers and the demand that have driven the demand for New Zealand hops and basically saved that agricultural industry, which is kind of an interesting thing. I mean, we love to cast aspersions at craft beer from, as insiders taking our own pot shots. But it is interesting how impactful that's been on that agriculture there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can't remember. Yeah. There was a story about a large American brewery. I thought that was contracting for like Kohatu or something, and like so a lot of these farms were just growing like large crops of single varieties for large industrial American breweries, and then they would drop the
hops for cores,
that's what it was, cores,
in the 90s,
and
right.
they would just like, and then those breweries would just like be like, oh, we're not using that anymore, and then the farms would be screwed. Yeah, a
tough time. But then this other avenue came around, and those flavors and aromas became more interesting, and also within this kind of context of, and strangely, it's hazy IPA primarily that created a platform for those, to truly shine, and that helped brewers balance some of the, use the kind of structural, kind of mineral, petrochemical kind of element to those hops as a balance against some of the, sweetness and fullness, in the beers, and worked really nicely conceptually. Well, I want to talk about some other beer.
Yeah.
I definitely want to talk about, your Farmstead beers and mixed culture beer, because that's such a core component, and you still, even today, are keeping that flame alive when, the world of saison and farmhouse ale, or as you call them, Farmstead Ale. And I should say that's a trademark term for Hill Farmstead.
And I can
Ale.
explain the reason behind that as well.
No, it's perfectly fine. But you are, that's such an important creative part, and seems inextricably tied to, the whole spirit and culture of Hill Farmstead. So I want to talk about that. Yeah. Before we do, breweries don't just need a point of sale system. They need a one-stop shop operating system. That's where Arrived comes in. Not only does Arrived offer a world-class POS built specifically for breweries, but they also provide Arrived brewery management, e-commerce, and more to help breweries scale and thrive. From taproom to distribution, Arrived gives breweries the tools to streamline operations and boost profits, all in one powerful platform. Visit Arrived, ARRYVED.com to learn more. Also, this episode is sponsored by PackTech, delivering craft beer multi-packing you can trust. PackTech's handles are made from 100% recycled plastic and are fully recyclable, helping breweries close the loop and advance the circular economy. With a minimalist design, durable functionality you can rely on, and custom color matching, PackTech helps brands stand out while staying sustainable. Trusted by craft brewers nationwide, they offer a smarter, sustainable way to carry your beer. To learn more, visit packtech-opi.com. That's PAKTECH-OPI.com. Also, if you're launching a brewery or acquiring an existing one, consider our brewery workshop and new brewery accelerator, September 14th through 17th in Fort Collins, Colorado. Over 4 days, we engage in panel discussions, technical brewery tours, networking, and small working group sessions to help you better understand and prepare for the challenge of brewery operation. Tickets are on sale now. Visit breweryworkshop.com for more information and to secure your spot. So let's talk about
Farmstead Ales.
Farmstead Ales.
Yeah. Yep,
I think, when we look at the history of saison in general, that early time was such a remarkable one for the development of mixed culture saison, of understanding how Brettanomyces works, understanding how some of these lactic acid bacteria can work to produce acidity, in controlled and refined amounts in these beers. And, and so it opened up a new avenue. Obviously, it was huge for a few years. And then it seems like the zeitgeist has, IPA has done what it's always done in craft beer, and continued to power on, while saison and Farmstead Ale, Farmhouse Ale, does its has kind of pulled back a little bit. But talk about that early foray into
that'd be great.
and exploring the way to use culture to make these beautiful expressive beers that are still some of my favorites in the entire world.
So when I was at the shed in 2005, I was in Columbus, Ohio for some reason, and I bought a few bottles from this brewery called Jolly Pumpkin, and brought them back.
I think I've heard of them before.
And I also had been going to, I think at that point I'd also already been to maybe like the Belgian Beer Fest or something else, and had some of Tommy's mixed culture stuff. So I opened these bottles and I'm like, what the hell? Like, because the bottles themselves didn't say anything about the flavor profile. These were the original bottles with the round labels. And I remember emailing the brewery and Ron writing back and just being like, yeah, there's like, that's how they're supposed to be. They're not infected. And, and then fast forward to the future, and Ron and I become friends, and God bless him. And, so I started playing around with pure Brett fermentations, and Joanne Curley Stevenson was at White Labs at that point, and we'd met somewhere, maybe at a festival, and she had tasted something that I was doing, and so she was like, I'll just send you vials of anything that you want. So I just was getting a dump of whatever yeast strains I wanted from White Labs, and was just doing little like Carboy, Golden Gate keg sort of trials and stuff, and created this beer called Substance D, which Conroy, the assistant brewer, had named because he was a Philip K. Dick fan, and was playing around with this. And at the time, there were very few people doing that in 2005 in the U.S. I think Sanctification maybe existed, maybe, and then there's like Ron. There were sort of a few other people that were doing this, and for me, it started to evolve at the point where like when I went to Belgium in 2007, and then when I was in Denmark, I had Wat is Da from De La Seine, which was blended saison. I think it was blended with Cantillon lambic, and I was just starting to like my kind of wheels were spinning more. Thinking more about this, and actually the beer that I had brewed as a guest brew during my trial work week at Norbert Breckhus was a pure Brett saison, which I later brewed again and then blended with Drie-Fontein and 2-year lambic, and that beer turned out really fantastic as well. Yeah, the sort of idea of working with Brettanomyces was even at one time one of my primary business plans. I was thinking that I would just open a pure Brett brewery, and just brew everything. So I was playing around with like brewing a stout with pure Brett, brewing an IPA with pure Brett, which we kind of have now with Self-Reliance. And then when I was in Copenhagen, I came across the Brettanomyces project and reached out to this guy named Chad, who is doing this project, and who I just talked to on the phone a couple hours ago. He says hello. Who's gone on to become my best friend in the beer world. And when I came and opened the brewery here, I started using some of Chad's yeast strains, and was getting really unique flavor profiles that I didn't know were possible up until that point. So we kept from the beginning. We would just have one tank with this mixed culture, which was just Saccharomyces and Brettanomyces, no bacteria, and we just keep the yeast going. And over time, it would start to sort of start to shift at the point that in like 2013, I added a different yeast, a different yeast strain, from Chad into the culture that started producing acidity, which turned out to be the first batch of coincidentally, they misprinted some Arthur labels where they were blue instead of green. And that batch was the first batch that had this like interesting acidity to it. So it's gone down in the enthusiast groups as like the blue label Arthur, and it was so interesting. So from that point on, also we also had punch-ins that were just doing quick like 1 to 2 month aging and whatnot, and then the beers at that point from like 2012 on had this same sort of classic acid profile. And when we went to Belgium in November of 2012, Bob and Dan and Scott Kerner, who started Three Penny Tap Room, and that was a trip where we did collaboration with Blogy, called Vermontoise, and then I think we're maybe the first commercial brewery to kind of brew at Fantôme. We did a beer called Five Sciences, which was, that in and of itself is a 10-minute story that I won't go into. It was on that trip when we were at Dodola and we had brought a bottle of Flora, and there was another American brewer there who had a beer that was just called Saison, happened to be there coincidentally, and I watched Chris kind of grill this Colorado American brewer about why he was using the word Saison. And in general, there's a lot of talk about appellation control and sort of whatnot. The Belgians were not that psyched that Americans were brewing beers and calling them Saison. And I was like, shit, this bottle of Flora says Saison on it. And Chris never said anything. But when I went back home, I was like, we have to come up with a different word. And that was the point where I paid a lawyer to do a search. And we were the only brewery in the world that had Farmstead in its name. And I was like, okay, cool. Let's trademark the name and then trademark Farmstead. And we'll start referring to these as Farmstead Ales instead of Saisons. And then we didn't use the word Saison again after that, and just kind of try to create our own fingerprint, which I think we did. And we still package in 375 and 750 ml bottles, bottle conditioned. I would, if the day ever came where we needed to can those things, I would close. Same, I won't do an imperial stout or bourbon barrel aged imperial stout in a can either. Like it has to be in.
I had some Saison Dupont in a can last week. Honestly, we bought some for prop beer for a story in the magazine, and thought, I want to try this. One bad. I can get down with it.
Yeah, I've had it in can as well. I've had it in draft too. I don't know. Just for me, the bottle, I don't know. Plus, like pouring beer from a can, I think is pretty sloppy compared to like from a 29 millimeter opening where the liquid comes out quite graciously. I don't know. It's like, it's meant to be the entire experience when I approach it.
Sure. Well, with this mixed fermentation, these beers early on, how'd you set about stamping your own imprint on it, and building a Hill Farmstead character to it? Because like everyone, you've got access to the same ingredients and the same tools, and you have the ability to make beer that, especially now in this current context here with this beautiful brewery, you have the ability to make very precise beer, and yet, the beautiful thing about Saison or Farmhouse or Farmstead, beer is this idea of rusticness. And it's something that we've tried to parse out, trying to understand how, what imparts that kind of character, and how you think about, the design of, these that feel, both expressive, but also hearty.
I don't know. I honestly couldn't tell you what, I mean, it's not, I guess over the course of those first few years, the beer has changed a bit as I was changing Brett strains. Like I brewed, I had been brewing beer de miel at both at the shed and then home brewing, et cetera. And I brewed the first batch of Anna on Thanksgiving Day, 2010. And that one, there's no acid. I found that like with the acid contribution from some of Chad's strains that it added this, it increased the palatability and the digestibility, I found. And also from a shelf life standpoint, especially now using biduals, with bottle conditioning, some of the other process stuff that we've introduced. I mean, a lot of our wine barrel aged beers, like especially Samuel, from brew day, the beer should still, I would guess, be on its peak plateau at like 10 years in the bottle. It's pretty incredible. I think that, there's Arthur, Anna, Florence, etc. And then there's Art, Anne, Flora, Samuel, Vera May, Civil Disobedience, some of the other things that are blended. I think that those, like the evolution of learning about these things has also been as much about bottle conditioning as it has been just the primary yeast. And much of my experience with bottle conditioning was informed by my relationship with Richard Geoffroy, who was the chef de cave at Dom Perignon and then has gone on to start Iwa Sake in Japan. But we met in February of 2014, and was it 2014 or 2013? 2014, February 2014. And at that point, I had no idea that Dom Perignon was bottle conditioned for like 8 to 10 years before release, for example. And we were tasting beers together, and he didn't know that
8 to 10 years of bottle conditioning
before release. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's still the case. It might be getting shorter now. I don't know which vintage is out on the shelf now. But at that point, like the 04, I think the 05 was out at that point in like 2013. But talking to him about it, and him explaining how the flavors change, and that was the point where I started building up our saison inventory, Farmstead Ale inventory, so that we were releasing Anna and Arthur and Florence at 1 year to the consumer, still at $10 a bottle at that point. And then on Anne and Art, it eventually got to a place like now where every one of these beers is released at what I think is the peak experience plateau. So just like monitoring sulfur compounds, monitoring minerality, some of the other things that continue to shift through the metabolization in the bottle, so that when someone buys the bottle, it should be at what I think is peak experience. And it's funny sometimes to like read people's reviews. They're having it for the first time. They're like, definitely seems like it needs more time. And I'm thinking to myself, like, I've tasted this every 4 months for the last 5 years. Like this is actually like in a great spot right now. But that was meant to be much more, again, focus on elegance, mouthfeel.
3 years from then when you put
it was probably pretty similar still. Yeah. So that was a really informative, or has been and still is a really informative friendship and kinship.
Are there any kind of what is some of the nature of that bottle conditioning in a broad sense that allows for that kind of extended aging and longer lifespan? I mean, you want to be careful, obviously, about oxygen in that kind of scenario, because it has the ability to completely shred and destroy this beer that you're making. Yeah. Anything else to that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot with handling, cell count, yeast strain selection as
temperature, storage temperature at all?
Storage, yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, these are all, and I've played with so many different variables over time. I'm pretty happy with where it's evolved to, but that's that's where we're at.
Sure. How, other brewers that I've talked to have talked about, finding ways to branch similar, saison recipes into varying ways, particularly with hops, and that hops can, take, saison in a wild variety of directions. How, you think about saison expression, both with local ingredients like dandelions and Vera May that you're going to pick here this week, potentially, as long as you get some sunshine out there. Right now it's a little rainy, and
yeah.
But then also, with other kinds of, dry hop expressions and other kinds of ways there. How do you think about, pushing that expression in different directions using hops or and other ingredients?
Yeah, I mean, we've played with that quite a lot with Self-Reliance and a few other different series that we've done. And yeah, I mean, keeping the acid and then the kind of like as Yvonne Debates would refer to it, pigeon shit character minimal, and like figuring out how to do that both through like deciding when to dry hop the beer, how much yeast is in suspension, and also like the temperature of the dry hop has helped mitigate some of those issues. But I mean, we have an entire single hop series of mixed culture single hop IPAs, basically.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, as we get on here in time, I want to kind of zoom out from brewing and talk about the kind of broader developments. We talked about the early days of the brewery early on, and and some of that development. But in this COVID and post-COVID time, you've experienced some significant personal shifts and are also, taking on a different kind of role here in the brewery and watching, again, 15 years in, the way that you relate to this business that has your name on it, that's on your family's property. Some of that relationship continues to develop and move in different directions. Talk about, the last 5 years.
Yeah, sure.
And, some of the change that's happened and some of the philosophical drive behind some of that change.
Yeah. I mean, the pandemic allowed a period of really deep introspection to begin to occur. And I've always been introspective, but the pandemic allowed a bit of silence to arrive for the first time. Like I kind of felt like, I think I wrote on our 10th anniversary, maybe Instagram post or website or something, like I was talking about how I felt like there'd been a continual concert, for like 10 years. It's probably what it feels like to be at a tree house or something. It's just been a constant concert. And then all of a sudden everything looked the same, only it was finally quiet and there was no one here and it was just me again. And that gave me an opportunity to really, I don't know, like at that point I started working with executive coaches in 2016. My first one was Steve Voigt, who was the CEO, CFO of King Arthur Flour, and then a few other folks. And then I started working with a coach who was much more grounded in spiritual traditions, in Yogananda Self-Realization Fellowship in this case. And I was trying to also I was like beginning to do the process of self-excavation that I needed to do to start understanding my nervous system as well. And I mean, at that point in May of 2020, pretty much the whole staff went on furlough for a while. And while we were trying to figure out what was going to happen, and then I took over brewing again, which was a stupid decision, which I regret, because it lasted almost like 3 years, 3 full years of just me brewing, eventually like back up to like 8 brews a week while running the company through the pandemic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Not advised. Very, yeah, that was a hyper-driven protector self that was like, okay, like you need to get in there and do this. And I should have just kept the majority of the leadership team that I had in place and just hemorrhaged money and not worried about it and just continued to have enjoyed the life that was going on. I mean, during that time, with me being so deeply back in, I managed to finally fully understand so many different aspects of the beer that I hadn't had a chance to from when we built the larger expansion, which opened in January of 2015. So I got like louder times down from like 2 hours to 50 minutes, like just all of these other process refinements, which the staff eventually was able to benefit from. But at the end of 2020, when we knew what the terms were going to be on PPP, I took PPP, and then at that point, I think we had 8 or 9 staff members, and then we knew it was going to be a slow January, February, March. So I gave those team members 10 weeks off paid, and they all had SMART goals. They had social, physical, and like personal goals that they were working on and frameworks. And when you think about it, I mean, most people haven't had 10 weeks off since they were like maybe 13 or 14 years old, if they were working summer jobs from the time they were 15. So the bulk of our staff was I mean, they didn't know what to do. And it was amazing. I ended up going to New Zealand and doing the quarantine. I got a critical worker visa because of the partnership in the hop breeding program. Apparently that's critical for the New Zealand economy.
Agriculture is critical.
So my mission during that time, during those 2 months in New Zealand, was to write company vision, mission, strategy, and I was pretty burned out at that point as well. It had been pretty nonstop for 15 years, with the 5 years before starting Hill Farmstead, and I was trying to figure out, is there a way to do this, to keep doing this, that's going to be fulfilling? Where I realized that I had arrived to this place where I was essentially a divided self, where my own personal values were not in alignment with the company. I mean, I wanted, from the origin, this was not what I set out to do. And philosophically, I'd been vegetarian, eating organic food since I was 15 years old, shopping local, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I was like, okay, we're gonna like try to like push growler sales, and we're gonna go organic, and and I was like, and if this doesn't work, then I don't know. I don't know if I want to do it. So, of course, right at the point that I came back, and when we came back and did, like we came back, I think like the first week of April, last week of March, and just did workshops for a week. No brewing, no sales, just bonding. And it was like the first day of school for everyone. Everyone was like, had haircuts, and, everyone was excited and smiling. For any of the brewers that are listening, it was a pretty magical moment to think about everyone having 10 weeks off and just being able to reset. You think about the grind that everyone has been going through for so long in this capitalist system. There's no space, like 1 week off doesn't do anything for anyone. You just dread your inbox piling up and what you have to do when you get back. It was pretty magical, and the receptivity and the ability for everyone to really just be centered was there. So that was also the point where I'd ordered meditation cushions, and the first day we met and did guided meditation. And still to this day, 5 years later or 4 years later, the staff still meets every day for 10 minutes and does group meditation at 9 a.m. I was just like, okay, there are things I've been wanting, that I want to exist in order for the company to keep going, sort of maybe beginning to develop some boundaries and non-negotiables. And yeah, the right around that same time was when the cost of a shipping container from China went up, or they raised the price. And then that just led this domino effect where everyone was like, oh, someone's raising the price of something. Well, we can raise the price. So I watched domestic barley, organic domestic barley, go from like 80 cents a pound, like local purveyor, New England, to like $1.20, because that's what Vireman was charging, right? But Vireman wasn't actually charging that. Vireman was it was marked up so much because of the freight and shipping containers. So, but the local places just saw an opportunity to hope to increase margins, and it just eventually made it completely unfeasible for us to still be able to, with at least within like the sort of hoppy clean beer, left brain beer, as I call it, to be able to like to be able to exist at the margins that we were. I tried it for a while, and also I'd managed to get a super sack of this organic barley that Coors had. At the time, our salesman from BSG had worked really, really hard to get us this, and so we brewed one batch of Edward with this barley, which was incredible. And then Coors was like, no. Like, no, we need to keep it all for ourselves. And I was like, I can get silo fills of this. It's amazing. And then it dropped and fell through. So yeah, through the course of those few years, I mean, for a little while we were closed on Saturdays. which was amazing. Like, curbside was pretty smooth for everyone. Then the tap room was reservation only because we didn't have that much staff. We wanted to be able to control. But as the world started to, open for business, more and more people were showing up without reservations, and we couldn't just be like, sorry, someone drives all the way out here. You can't, you can't be like, sorry, turn. So we ended up, it's a reminder of the ways that we all continue to perpetually compromise on what is best for ourselves and best for one another because of the corporate system and what we have to do in order to continue to exist financially. And just watching it, there was a banner hanging outside, a bread and pub banner that said like, resistance of the heart against business as usual. That was hanging outside. And I remember reading a Google review around that time, like after we hung it up, that said something like, what kind of crazy mother effer runs this place? Not open on Saturdays, like get with the plan. Like, do you know how much money you're leaving on the table? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's just like that mentality. It was a beautiful time to be able to just to be able to like actually feel for the first time that things were not out of control and that we're proactively in the driver's seat as opposed to like constantly reacting to whatever's happening, which it had been like for 10 years.
You can change the way you look at that, and rather than needing to be open on Saturday in order to maximize profit and hit a budget for a week, you can choose to open on Saturday because you know that that's a day that customers can make a visit, so, and you can do it out of kindness for them rather than just for profit maximization.
It's a good segue. So we actually did, at the point that the border opened to Canada, when Canadians could come in, we did a Saturday Canadian Appreciation Day. So all these Quebec customers that hadn't been here in over a year or however long it had been, we opened on this special day just for them, and it was amazing. And now fast forward, we're sitting a couple of years later in a position where because of the tariffs and the existing president's declaration of war, essentially, which is how the Canadians refer to it, of wanting Canada to become part of the United States, we just lost like 30% of our customer base. I mean, we're like 30 minutes from the Canadian border, and but now there are people boycotting. We receive emails from people that are like, I used to come 5 to 10 times a year. The tariffs made it bad enough, but now we must boycott the United States as a whole. We're really sorry. And I mean, if the wow, what other policy decisions are going to happen next? And just, I mean, we'll probably end up trying to do some Canadian Appreciation Day again soon. I mean, there's like, for us in Vermont, there's a library in Derby Line that is built on the border. Like half of the library is in Quebec and half is in the United States. Like there's, like, for most of us, we don't even think of, these are our neighbors and our friends just as much as someone from southern Vermont is. So that's a little tangent. We won't go down that road. I think a lot of us share similar sentiments about,
but the listeners don't know that I will be heading to Canada tonight and recording a whole series of podcasts with Quebecois brewers for the same exact reason that you say, because Canada are great friends of ours. There's amazing work happening there, and they certainly don't deserve this ire and focus, and what is ultimately just bad policy, and bad rhetoric. I think that it's disappointing, misplaced, and generally saddens most of us who celebrate the fantastic work that our neighbors to the north and good friends are engaged in. But that's right. That's another issue. We've talked about, we've gotten up to, this, COVID in this present tense. You also engage in, some lifestyle changes as a part of this development. You don't drink alcohol now at this point. How do you balance managing this participation, in the brewery, this leadership role, but then also, that requires then from a product standpoint for you and a creative standpoint, pushing control, decision making, even creative decisions down to the team that you've built here. How do you manage that in the day-to-day nowadays?
Yeah, I mean, part of the self-excavation work of the last few years has led me to understand that, unsurprisingly, various aspects of childhood trauma, so on and so forth, had led me to be hypervigilant. No shit. I suppose you don't make refined beer in a controlled manufacturing environment without being hypervigilant, which can mean like looking for things that are out of place instead of celebrating the things that are in the right place. Which unfortunately over time is like how we start to filter the world, and how we start to see the world. And I've been telling the staff for a long time that the general rules, the sort of principles of operation of Hill Farmstead and like what it takes to make incredible beer, the rules that govern that are not the same rules that govern like having loving, fulfilling relationships in the outside world. And I think that's another byproduct of the patriarchy and capitalism as well, unfortunately. Yeah, so part of that work and that integration, has just been. I mean, I've stopped drinking at multiple points in my life. I think everyone, maybe not everyone, but probably a lot of people listening to this podcast are like, oh yeah, maybe I do drink too much. Yeah. If you're in the brewing industry, you probably do, and it's really just been legitimized, because it's like, I remember going to the doctor and the doctor being like, you have 20 beers a week. Like, well, yeah, but you're a brewer, you're in the industry. It's like, in retrospect, like that doctor is not a good doctor. Like, no, that doctor should be telling me what's up and make me feel a little bit of shame and a little bit of guilt, and think about my health, and the overall impact on consciousness. So, I mean, this also came out of that New Zealand sabbatical as well, and sort of thinking about consciousness largely. So when I came back, that was when we introduced conscious consumption. Hill Farmstead has always like kind of limited the amount of beer that people could drink on site. At that point, we released Charlie, which was 1.8% alcohol mixed fermented, lightly dry hopped Farmstead Ale. Now we have No Bad Parts, named after the Richard Schwartz, who's the founder of IFS, Internal Family Systems, named after one of his books. It's a 0.5% alcohol, or I should say non-alcoholic malt beverage that will be coming out soon. It's just on draft now. For me, within, it's been difficult because at times, like doing QC sessions, they're like I'll spit, but there are times when there's like back palate where you have to swallow, and it feels like a compromise, unfortunately. And I've also had to eliminate caffeine, just realizing that it also just adds to the same sort of modulation of the nervous system in the same way. Just I'm not able to stay totally present and centered, and realizing that I'd been dissociating in different ways for a really long time. But I also think that it's that dissociativeness, which is also maybe a byproduct of imagination, can also be a superpower and manage to help me be able to walk through the brewery no matter where I am on the planet, and then text someone and be like, did you guys remember to do such and such and such, right? And they're like, oh, thanks. Yeah. Okay. Right. But was just never really able to relax. So, now, let me see, last summer I did ayahuasca in Colombia, and I was doing deep IFS work, lots of other self-excavation, and just kind of continued that journey. But then just trying to be back in the brewery with onboarding Ryan into the COO role, a bunch of other projects that were going on, house renovation, etc. I just found myself bringing caffeine back into my life, and then getting to a point where I was tasting things again, and then the sort of the same sort of like shadow starts to descend, like a little more dissociativeness, less presence, not as emotionally available, so on and so forth. So the pendulum goes back to the middle now. And I mean that we've really altered the way, like, I mean, it used to be that for every day that you worked here, you would get a 750 milliliter growler of beer that you could take home. Now it's a 12 ounce bottle. Just sort of like trying to help everyone see that their consumptive patterns are maybe not the best for their health. And I mean, and alcohol affects everyone differently, I think, from a consciousness and presence level. But I think that ultimately, from a health perspective, it's not arguable. It's pretty empirical that the impact is real. So we should all be, I think anyway, if we want to like live longer, curbing our consumptive patterns. So that, I mean, that also comes at the same time as, yeah, for me, like we've got Hill Farmstead, this backdrop of 15 years of like fermenting, this kind of like alchemical fermentation. And then I've got this sort of inner fermentation of like understanding myself through the work that I do that has eventually led to this place where I feel like I'm capable of being a more considerate, patient, embodied leader for the staff, and not as reactive, not as much like, not as sort of like principled and closed-minded, but much more open-minded and open-hearted. And that's been part of that whole process.
What does that mean for the future? You know, you're now 15 years in, there's expectations. Hill Farmstead is still regarded as one of the premier craft breweries in the world. And, you know, at the same time, you've gone through ups and downs and ringers and been in different headspaces through this, lived through a pandemic. It's been somewhat exhausting, I imagine, from your perspective, to drive to that need to recharge. And now craft beer as a whole is in an interesting place where there are more ups and downs. There are some folks that are growing and a lot of folks that are not. And, some of the excitement that drove those early days, that intensity of passion, that certain consumers expressed towards this new thing in the early 20-teens, as this whole entire category of beer became a thing that didn't exist before, that drove enthusiasm, a real sheer enthusiasm. And that energy has now settled into much more of a consistent, even keel, but there's much fewer spikes of high intensity that may have been exciting and driven you in the past. Where do you find that motivation now, and where do you see happening? How do you envision the next 5 years, the next 10 years? There's also, others have talked about it in the past. I know, Henry Monkish has told me this several times personally. Like, he has a fantasy about just closing the brewery down one day and no announcement, we're just going to drop the mic and walk away from it, and this project will be done. And obviously they've gone a different direction with that for a whole bunch of other reasons. I'll let him speak about that. But there's always this idea that, at some point, maybe the project will run its course and that will be that. How does that future look for you? How do you look at that now? Also knowing that whatever your perspective is today may be different a year from now and a year after that.
Yeah, I mean, so after coming back from that New Zealand sabbatical, I guess actually before leaving on that, I had this staff fill out a questionnaire where they voted on, like, there was like a list of like 50 different adjectives, and they're like, they like voted on these as far as what they thought the company's values were. And I ended up taking the things that received the lowest score that had no votes and making those the company values. And so those company values were, it goes A, B, C, D, I, S, T. awareness, belonging and trust, collaboration, deliberateness, inquiry, stewardship, and transparency. And the focus on stewardship for me at that point was really in the sense that I'd gotten the brewery, to this place, or, leading, looking up in the lookout, the nest of the ship. But that I would love to have a family. I would love to be able to step back and relax a bit more. And that it was time for us to start building the systems internally for that to exist. That the future of Hill Farmstead would be based on a conception of stewardship. And for me as a steward, I mean, I have multiple plots of land. There's a house here. I live down there. Stewardship is also family legacy, so on and so forth. And the focus internally for the staff has been on stewardship for quite a while now. And it's taken sort of trying to put the fundamental vision, or the architecture, what is Hill Farmsteadness? What does Hill Farmstead stand for? What is our philosophy? It's interesting to look at Yamaha, for example, some of these very celebrated Japanese companies have, and Toyota, they have their own manufacturing process philosophies. And I was like, okay, what would a Hill Farmstead manufacturing philosophy look like? So trying to lay out some of the architecture for the staff to be able to empower them to make the decisions to navigate and try to uphold some of what the company has stood for that got us this far. And I think that, the future of the company entirely depends on the ability of the existing team to continue to meet its needs on its own without me needing to save the day.
So for you, if this can sustain without your incredibly hands-on, hyper-vigilant attention, then it will be a long-term success.
Yeah, I mean, I'm what I envision myself moving into, and I think I'm into that process now, is like a sage mentor, sage advisor to the staff, as opposed to actively engaged with and running the operations. And I owe that to myself to not do that. I mean, looking back at the last 15 years, I think about a lot of the decisions that I made, and so many of those decisions were not for myself. A lot of those decisions, building the bigger brewery. I mean, I remember the first 5 years of the brewery, the office and the bathroom that the staff would use were in my house. I mean, imagine having breakfast with your girlfriend on Saturday morning, and the staff, multiple staff members need to use the, there's use the bathroom. There's no real privacy. There's no separation, no boundary. And having to tell customers that they needed to go to the bathroom, the woods are there. Most people just go, which is totally fine for some of us, but there were some people who actually felt like I insulted their, it was character assassination. What? I couldn't. So building the tap room, building the office, building the bigger brewery to try to meet some level of demand, but also have a place for people to not have to wait in the elements or in the rain, so on and so forth. I mean, I've said this, or I've told this story a few times. I mean, I wish that in 2013 I had taken, I don't know, done a month-long silent meditation retreat, some just deep introspection, maybe with a coach who was okay, you're at a critical juncture right now. I mean, and if I could go back in time, I mean, I know it can't really change anything, but I think, at that point I still would have had the opportunity to just take the brewery seasonal, or, be open 6 months out of the year or whatnot. But once you build a machine up to a certain point, your fixed cost between your CO2, your bulk CO2, and your, all the other things that are running that you're paying, that you're leasing, so on and so forth. You just have all these fixed costs that you have to operate. You have to operate year round. And yeah, I often think back to some of the decisions that I would have made differently if I had to put myself and self-love and some boundaries first, as opposed to just like, okay, this is success. This is what you have to do. You have to just keep feeding it. Just keep doing it. I mean, and we haven't grown since 2015. Like we still brew the same amount of beer that we were brewing then. We're just like consistently on that same plateau. There's no growth goal. But for me moving forward, I think that it's really important to start making decisions based on what's best for myself and my own well-being, and not necessarily for customers or, and I think that this sort of move or in this general direction is actually the best for the staff, because it empowers them and gives them more agency over outcomes without relying on me. I'm still there in the worst case scenarios, but and so far it's going quite well. And because of all the deep work that I did taking over the brewery for those 3 years during COVID, like fermentation kinetics, the yeast strains that we're using, brew house operations, like all those things are the most consistent that they've ever been because of the deep dive back into it. So maybe that's the silver lining from that period of time that I can't get back.
Is there a system in place now to let your team, as they learn on these things to continue to develop? When you talk about manufacturing process, obviously that's an important part of that, in that Japanese kind of model is, bringing improvement from all of the hands-on places so that you can continue to improve as a group and not just, from a top-down perspective.
Right. Yeah. Matteo at Jasper Hill has this great phrase. He refers to these things as not as SOPs, but as best known way. Because if it's the best known way, it means that there can be another way that then becomes the best known, and it's open to dialogue. And then the thing that we're fighting against is just process creep over time, with people not being transparent about variables that they're changing. And I do find that the majority of issues that arise are from people slightly modifying. It's like the butterfly effect. Initial sensitive dependence on initial conditions is like slightly changing things, or just being like, oh, well, I stopped taking that reading because it had been the same for 3 weeks. And it's like, okay, well, now it's different because it changed and you didn't catch it because you stopped. Like consistency, still trying to maintain consistency to the best known way. That's what we're up against.
Sure. So you're in this for the next number of years now. Hill Farmstead's going to continue to carry its flag forward.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you do with the time that you buy back for yourself?
I was just in Japan for 3 weeks, and that was great. Traveling there with my girlfriend, and then since then, like helping with 15th anniversary planning and stuff, but have really been taking the time to read and write, which originally the reason I started the brewery was to live a life of mind and spend more time reading and writing. And then that never ended up happening. So I feel like I'm sort of catching up on reading this backlog of books. But I'm about to start painting my house. There's a bunch of other projects.
15 years to get back to that original business plan of brewing a little bit of beer, just enough so that you can have an income while you read and write and pursue that kind of.
It's a long detour.
To get here eventually. I think that's something that all of us with small businesses, in that kind of hands-on position can feel. And it's certainly a challenge that I've faced being hands-on in my business and feeling like every one of those pieces I'm responsible for and every deadline has to be met. And I, rather than trying to ask other people to cover the distance on that, covering it myself. And, the last couple of years, the same kind of thing. It's been nice to think about. We've got a talented staff that can do more, and I can create some space to work on my house with my kids and, put up some drywall and paint some walls and finish it. And, then maybe do a little bit of painting or get out on my mountain bike a little bit more. And so realizing that business is not the sole end of the life of, goal of that life, is kind of that important realization that's a part of it. And it can be an important part of it. And we love work and love doing what I do. But, there's also that other part that needs to be separate from that. And
you have to honor and fulfill that other part. Yeah. And I feel like work, some of us confuse that productivity with fulfillment, but it's not actually nourishing us in the ways that our inner child needs us to be nourishing, Yeah.
That's fair. What's the most exciting thing for you, in the near term future? What kind of keeps you animated?
You mean like coming up? What's exciting?
I guess we've talked about this quite a bit. What's driving you now?
Yeah.
But is there anything in particular that in the near term that that is creating some of that energy and that spark and some of that drive forward?
No, I'm sort of. It's certainly some of these events that we're having for the 15th anniversary. I've got like old Danish friends coming to stay with me and other friends coming through. But for the most part, I'm reassessing what creativity looks like for me, that's not related to beer, and figuring out how to also honor those parts of myself. So like some ceramics and pottery classes and things that are just art for the sake of art without commerce, So if you were doing this podcast a month from now, I might gift you a clay mug, and yeah,
I'll paint you a painting if you send me a mug.
Yeah.
All right. Although that just sounds so transactional that
that's
kind of
too
ruins the spirit
transactional.
of it.
Yeah.
Well, I could go on forever, but I think this is a great place to bring it to a close. G&D Chiller's engineering crew have been piping breweries, wineries, and distilleries for more than 30 years. Berkeley Yeast bioengineers ordinary strains to make them extraordinary. Old Orchard formulates custom blends featuring specialty ingredients. Indie Hops Lorien combines traditional elements of noble hops with an elegant twang of modernity. Discover how steel chill cups can put your brand on every pour at steelchillcups.com. Arrived as your one-stop brewery operating system, PackTech is trusted by craft brewers nationwide for their smarter, sustainable way to carry your beer. And the Brewery Workshop will help you prepare for the challenges of brewery operation. If you've enjoyed this podcast, go to beerandbrewing.com, click on the subscribe button. Help us continue to bring great conversations to you from all over the planet with some of the best brewers and most creative minds in beer. Shaun, if people want to learn more about Hill Farmstead and the Farmstead Ales and the soft textural IPAs and all of the other beers that you make from here on the farm on Hill Road in Upper Vermont, where can they go find more about you?
Both our website and social media, where they can send an email to info@hillfarmstead.com and ask some questions.
It's a beautiful place up here. This is my third time visiting, and it's been wonderful to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You're so natural and so smooth.
Oh,
it's great.
That means so much. Cheers.
Thank you. Have a great trip to Canada. Thanks everyone for listening.
This podcast has been brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those who love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media @craftbeerbrew.